And I think we have to ask, do today's Marxist activists have any reason to say that they hate above anyone else in the world the church leaders most celebrated by our cultural elites? Or do they find that their efforts are not only not hampered by Christian cultural elites, but are in fact helped by them?
Megan Basham of the Daily Wire, speaking at the 2026 Issues Etc. Making the Case conference.
We must resist the infiltrators and use our power in such a way that when those who oppose the cause of Christ are asked who they hate most in the world, they think of our names.
You can watch Megan Basham making the case against progressive influence in the church from this year's Making the Case conference. For a contribution of $250 by Labor Day, we'll send you a link to watch the entire conference. Learn more at issuesetc.org.
Pro-life incumbents have done very well since Dobbs. Not one pro-life incumbent has lost a statewide race.
Margaret Thatcher very famously said, socialism works great until you run out of other people's money. In the Islamic system, the system works great until you run out of the infidels' money.
I love this quotation from Luther. He says, "Spare me from a church in which there are no sinners." The essential character of being a Christian is to be a redeemed sinner.
If we are Christians and we suffer, is that so unbelievable that we should bear a splinter of Jesus' cross after he has gone through so much as a perfect one?
Hospice nurses driving around from patient to patient love listening to Issues Etc.
Well, when Pope Leo donned the fisherman's ring, he did so with a promise of unity in the Roman Catholic Church, but very recently, he excommunicated 750 priests, some of them, well, bishops, at least according to their own county, but not according to Leo's. And the Society of St. Pius X, the excommunicated group, may number in priests and worshipers up to 600,000. And if you've read any of the news, Roman Catholic churches are closing every single day because of lack of priests. Greetings and welcome to Issues Etc., live on this Wednesday afternoon, July the 8th. I'm Todd Wilkin. Thanks for tuning us in. We will talk about media coverage of Pope Leo's excommunication of the Society of St. Pius X with Terry Mattingly. Dr. John Flo joins us for part 3 of our series on Christianity and psychiatry. Part 4 of our series on divorce and remarriage. Ben Mays will be alongside for that. He's author of the Issues Etc. book of the month for July, Divorce and Remarriage, Ecclesiastical Discernment and Pastoral Care. And then Dr. Jordan Cooper, Executive Director of Just and Sinner, will answer the question whether or not the Nephilim in Genesis 6 and Numbers 13 are spiritual beings. Terry Mattingly is Senior Fellow on Communications and Culture at St. Constantine College in Houston, Texas. He writes Rational Sheep, a Substack newsletter on faith, family, and mass media. He's author of the National On Religion column for the Andrews McMeel Universal Syndicate, and for 2 decades he led the GetReligion.org website. Terry, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
So what was the sin that was committed by the Society of St. Pius X and its leaders?
Well, essentially, you could say first and foremost that they lost patience. And the people around the Pope lost patience with them. But I think the heart of the matter, you know the old saying, is the Pope Catholic? They answered not, if you look at their documents carefully, they answered that question not with the word no. They essentially answered it with the answer, the Pope is Catholic on issues when his advisors want him to be Catholic, and he's not Catholic on issues that we want him to be Catholic on. In effect, they accused the Pope essentially of being an Anglican, of allowing the Roman Catholic Church on critical doctrine to teach one thing in, let's say, Chicago, and something else in San Francisco, one thing in Washington, D.C., and something different in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. They said the Roman Catholic Church is being inconsistent on a lot of issues and turning its head away from certain issues in the church, but not others. But I want to stress this, in the end, they said they were going to do something, and then they did it, that is exclusively under the control of the Pope of Rome in the Roman Catholic Church. There are lots of things that they want Pope Leo to do that are ultimately under the control of the Pope of Rome. But he isn't doing anything about them. So is that clear? And yes, at the backside of all of this is something that you and I have discussed before with listeners. Why is the Latin Mass such a powerful symbol in the post-Vatican II world, and especially to a generation, an older generation of Catholic leaders that are often defined with the phrase, the spirit of Vatican II? And what that means is these are people who don't want the church to be guided by the actual words of the Second Vatican Council. And trust me, the SSPX has some problems with the words of the Second Vatican Council. I'm not denying that. But there are plenty of conservative Catholics who have no problem with the actual documents of the Vatican II, especially as they were interpreted by someone like Pope Benedict XVI. But they have tons of problems with how they're interpreted by people that said we need to follow not a kind of fundamentalist approach to the words and the actual teachings of Vatican II, but we should stress the moments in Vatican II where it looks to the future, and we should anticipate what the spirit of Vatican II is, and trust that that spirit can lead us on to new reforms and new changes, synodality even, that gets us what we think the Catechism of the Catholic Church should say on crucial doctrines. And until then, on those controversial things that are in the Catechism, the Pope can kind of affirm them, but mainly he just needs to be silent. And here's the big idea for what I have to say about what happened here. For at least 15 years or so, 20 years even, Catholics that I know have been saying that forget everything that comes out in documents from Rome. Forget everything that is said in press conferences. Forget everything, even in some case, what happens in papal encyclicals. They say the only thing that matters when you look at the Roman Catholic Church today is which priests and bishops get promoted and which priests and bishops don't get promoted or even get disciplined. And that's really, I think, the big idea of this story. The leaders of the SSPX, they basically dared the Pope not to be a pope when it comes to what they were doing to violate his powers. And it doesn't matter that the Pope is not doing the Pope thing when it comes to other people in the Roman Catholic Church who violate the teachings of the Church. Not all sins are considered equal. That's the big story of this, what is now legally, the term actually applies, a schism.
So I'd come at this from a Lutheran perspective, which in many ways has some of its genesis in a papal decree excommunicating Martin Luther. That's part of the history there. But I look in from the outside to the Roman Church and I say, how can it be, we've talked about this for years, Terry, that many popes, a long string of popes, won't even defrock a priest or a cardinal or a bishop for complicity in real crimes like the sexual abuse stand. Mm-hmm. They simply get put away quietly. but consecrate a bishop against his will, and you're gone. And it goes to your point there that there are some sins that are worse than others, but it's almost inexplicable that the Roman Catholic Church, pope after pope, has slow-walked discipline on the priestly abuse scandal, and then within a year of his ascension to the throne, he has excommunicated 750 priests.
Well, I mean, this has been cooking on the back burner for a very long time. And I think there's a real sense in which what conservative Catholics around the world are saying right now, when you talk to them candidly, is we're all trying to decide, is Pope Leo going to be Pope Francis, or is he going to be a gentler, sneakier version of Pope Benedict? Is he going to do anything that concedes the valid points of conservatives? But your thing about disciplining priests involved in the abuse scandals, the Pope has the right to slow walk it. The Pope has the right to put them away quietly. The Pope has the right to do all of that, but he's not going to do it publicly. I'll ask you one question here. In this whole thing of who is promoted and who is disciplined. Look right now at the College of Cardinals, the ultimate playing field of power in the Roman Catholic Church. Who's doing better right now in the United States of America? The bishops who pled for the disciplining of the fallen Cardinal McCarrick, and the cardinals and bishops who clashed with Cardinal McCarrick. Who's doing better? Those guys or the actual disciples of Cardinal McCarrick? People that he helped advance up the ranks, and openly said he did, all the way to them becoming cardinals. Who's doing better in the Roman Catholic Church right now? The leaders who favor the approach of a McCarrick, which is maybe never openly attack the church's teachings on key issues. And of course, we're talking about issues of marriage, gender, sexuality, etc. That's what the world is about. Who's being advanced more? The disciples of Cardinal McCarrick or the enemies of Cardinal McCarrick? And I think under anyone who would chart you a list in this who's promoted, who's not promoted list, who's punished, and there are quiet ways to punish people in the Roman Catholic Church, including not promoting them when they should have been under all traditional approaches to church governance. Who's doing better? McCarrick allies and disciples or McCarrick enemies? And, oh, by the way, right to address your point, what happened to the final report on what McCarrick did or didn't do? What happened to the promised investigation of his influence in the church, the money he raised, the people he promoted and backed? What happened to the McCarrick report? And I guess you could say that not only did the leaders of SSPX, not only did they fail to realize that Leo was not going to come to their rescue in the end, they also had the audacity to think that the New York Times and the primary powers of the media world would eventually cover the issue that they thinks issues, plural, that they think matter, as well as the issues that the Spirit of Vatican II army thinks matters. And that's never, ever going to happen. When you look at the Associated Press and the New York Times today, and you ask a simple question, why did the SSPX leaders do what they did? And how would they, in their words, how would they explain their actions? You basically say they opposed Vatican II, they opposed ecumenism, which is a big way of saying how the church relates to other churches and other faiths, and that's real. And then they'll throw in the fact that long ago, in the early 70s, there was a bishop in the SSPX who denied the Holocaust and flirted, to say the least, with anti-Semitism. And then they'll quickly say, oh, and by the way, they backed away from that. But they'll still make that the primary charge against them today, along with their refusing to obey the Pope. And like I said, refusing to obey the Pope is valid. That gets you kicked out of the church.
Terry Mattingly is our guest. We're talking about media coverage of Pope Leo's excommunication of the Society of St. Pius X. We'll get to some media coverage of it next.
It's also a confirmation of what the church has proclaimed for millennia, that we are not made to be alone, but we are made for covenant.
Sociologist Dr. Brad Wilcox speaking at this year's Issues Etc. Making the Case conference.
So give today's young men and women the truth that they deserve. Pursue marriage, pursue it with intention, and pursue it in your 20s, when the window is widest and the possibilities most open. The road ahead, of course, is not easy, but it leads somewhere worth going, and you, 20-somethings here, were made for this journey.
You can watch and listen to Dr. Brad Wilcox making the case for 20-something marriage from the 2026 Making the Case conference. For a $250 gift by Labor Day, we'll send you a link to video and audio recordings of the entire conference. Learn more at issuesetc.org.
Listen to what you want, when you want. You're listening to Issues Etc.
Lutherans for Life provides unique gospel-centered, life-issue-focused educational resources, audio-video training, post-abortion counseling, and more from a Lutheran perspective. Learn about LFL resources and forming a life team or life chapter or becoming a life advocate by calling 888-364-LIFE or by calling 888-364-5433 or visiting lutheransforlife.org. lutheransforlife.org.
Unity and variety can be a hot topic among Christians and Lutherans in particular, and the June-July issue of the Lutheran Witness takes this topic up with articles such as Unity and Variety Through the Ages by Richard Serena, Formed Together by Sean Dinzer, A Call to Faithful and Harmonious Variety in Worship, and much more. To get your copy, visit cph.org/witness or visit witness.lcms.org to learn more. The Lutheran Witness, helping you interpret the world from a Lutheran perspective.
Welcome back to Issues Etc. I'm Todd Wilkin. We're talking about media coverage of Pope Leo's excommunication of the Society of St. Pius X. Terry Mattingly is our guest, author of the National on Religion column for the Andrews McMeel Universal Syndicate. Terry, did any of the coverage, and I mean this includes the paper of record, the New York Times, did they adequately explain what the Society of St. Pius X is?
Well, they did from the viewpoint of their critics. They certainly explained what the society is with accurate information about the crimes, sins even, that their critics would levy against them. But I don't think they ever really attempted to wrestle with how the society defines itself. And I think it's important to back up. And the Catholic publications, some of them, of course, did mention this kind of thing. But here's an actual statement that I think it would have helped if someone had talked to members of the society and asked what they mean by this. This is from the foundation document. When in doubt, look at what an organization said when it starts its work, the core of its identity. This is a little bit long, but listen for some key words here. We hold fast with all our heart and all our soul to Catholic Rome, guardian of the Catholic faith and of the traditions necessary to preserve this faith, to eternal Rome, mistress of wisdom and truth. We refuse, on the other hand, and have always refused to follow the Rome of neo-modernist and neo-Protestant tendencies, which were clearly evident in the Second Vatican Council and, after the Council, in all the reforms that derived from it. Okay, the statement goes on and said these reforms contribute to the destruction of the Church, to the ruin of the priesthood, to the abolition of the sacrifice of the Mass and of the sacraments. And then, here comes a big word. This Reformation, stemming from liberalism and modernism, is poisoned through and through. It derives from heresy and ends in heresy, even if all of its acts are not formally heretical. Now, what was the gigantic headline word in that statement?
Heretical?
Heretical, I would say the big one. They accused the Vatican II Catholics of their own liberal reformation. The big word is reformation. Is the Pope Protestant? They're not so much talking about the Pope, but is the spirit of Vatican II world, are they Protestant? Are they Catholic? And they right up front, this is 1974, they're saying the people who back the modernist and neo-Protestant tendencies, their words, in the Second Vatican Council, this Reformation stemming from liberalism is modernism, is poisoned through and through. Now, that's a powerful statement. It's short. You could even get the word Reformation in a headline. My point is, if you wanted to write a story that represented why the society took this gamble, I would talk to one or two of its bishops, and there are some who were quoted on the record in stories. They were willing to talk. Ask them if they think the Roman Catholic Church today is in a state of schism because there are Protestants in it who want to reform it in the direction of Marxism, liberalism, relativism, etc. And then ask them, give us examples of why you think that. And the minute you ask that question, you're going to hear about what they consider the big issues, and it's not just the Latin Mass. We don't get, surprisingly enough, the point of view of the society really doesn't make it into the story. You do have people, the EWTN story, the Archbishop of Kansas City, Kansas, talked about the sorrow and finally said fidelity to sacred tradition is never opposed to fidelity to the successor of Peter. Okay, that's true. That is certainly true. These people in the society ultimately decided that, to some degree, that wasn't enough for them. They saw the Pope refusing to be Pope on the issues they cared about, instead of the issues that Spirit of Vatican II Catholics care about. I think that's the bottom line in this story. So look through the Associated Press, look through the New York Times, and try to say, where do you have statements of what the SSPX is all about? Here's from the Associated Press. French Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre founded the society SSPX in 1970 in opposition to the modernizing reforms of the Second Vatican Council. Among other things, the 1960s meetings, known as Vatican II, revolutionized the Church's relations with other Christians, ecumenism, Jews, interfaith relations, people of other faiths, even Islam, and allowed Mass to be celebrated in the vernacular rather than Latin. I would argue that they weren't just upset about the fact that you could celebrate the Mass in Latins other than Latin. They were mad about the beginning of efforts to stop the Mass from being celebrated in Latin. I think if you offered the society today the actual text, ironically, of Vatican II on the handling of Latin in the Mass, the handling of traditional hymnody in the Mass, and efforts to protect the historic rites of the Church, whether that's Eastern Rite or Latin, I think they'd take it. The problem is, here's that Protestant angle again, that Anglican angle again. Theology by zip code. It is totally different to be a Latin Mass Catholic in Chicago than it is to be a Latin Mass Catholic in large parts of places like Kansas and some other places where the bishops have reached out and have been willing, even under Francis, have been and worked behind the scene against Francis to try to get Francis to give them more room to recognize the Latin Mass among their people. In effect, and this is a big idea for this discussion, there are Catholic bishops who believe the best way to undercut the power of the society is not by crushing it, but by actually being kind and gracious to people who want to celebrate the Latin Mass. And it wouldn't help if the Pope released the McCarrick Report and actually, I don't know, stopped letting German priests and bishops get promoted and even handed red hats if they actively oppose the Church's teachings on marriage and sexuality. And, lurking in the background, who handled the abuse in what way? So I hope that addresses your primary question there. But I think if you ask the society what this is all about, they would say Protestantism. And boy, that's not a word that people in the Vatican are going to want to be accused of.
With only about a minute here, what more do you want to see in future news coverage of this story?
I want to see more interviews with actual people in the society. And I want to ask them what they think of anti-Semitism in the Church. Go ahead. If that's the big issue, ask them that. But ask them specifically, do you think you would have been kicked out by Pope Benedict, and why not? Why or why not? And did you expect Leo to treat Latin Mass Catholics better? And if so, why did you lose patience with him? I think those would be good questions, but that's going to mean talking, probably with recording machines running for accuracy, talking to members of the society and asking them why they did what they did, instead of settling for what their critics say about what the society did and why they did it. Talk to both sides and ask them those questions.
Terry Mattingly is Senior Fellow on Communications and Culture at St. Constantine College in Houston, Texas. He writes Rational Sheep, a Substack newsletter on faith, family, and mass media. He's author of the National On Religion column for the Andrews McMeel Universal Syndicate, and for 2 decades he led the GetReligion.org website. Terry, thanks.
Glad to be here.
When we come back, the conclusion of our 3-part series on Christianity and psychiatry with Dr. John Flo. What do Jesus and Paul teach about marriage, divorce, unchastity, and desertion? The Issues Etc. book of the month for July is Divorce and Remarriage, Ecclesiastical Discernment and Pastoral Care. This new resource is published by Concordia Publishing House. Their phone number, 1-800-325-3040. You can learn more about divorce and remarriage at issuesetc.org. Divorce and Remarriage by Dr. Ben Mays. The Issues Etc. book of the month for July.
Birds sing, cows moo, thunderstorms wake you from a deep sleep, but for many, they can't hear it. They're deaf, living in a world of total silence. The Epitha Lutheran Mission Society for Deaf Ministry is the only recognized service organization in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod devoted exclusively to the deaf and hard of hearing. Their mission is to bring the gospel message of Jesus' love and saving grace to those who are deaf. Learn more at elms-deaf.org.
We're supported by listeners like you. You're listening to Issues Etc.
This fallen creation is bested by tornado, hurricane, flood, pandemic, and more. LCMS Disaster Response helps our congregations, their pastors, and other church workers to reach out to their members and neighbors with mercy which flows from Christ to altar. We offer quality volunteer training, help for congregational readiness and response, and disaster grant funding. To learn more, visit lcms.org/disaster. That's lcms.org/disaster.